All right, all right, all right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Day. Thank you for joining us. My name is Quetzal Cortez. I'm the guy that knows Luis Malbas. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Joseph Suarez, and his session on learning the ultimate meta skill. Looking forward to his talk on adapting and change. You know, I've kind of found that key to my own personal success. So I'm looking forward to what he's got to say. Don't forget to use the session chat area to the right of your screen. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll be hanging out in the background in case of any technical difficulties. But other than that, I'm going to hand it over to Joseph. So please take it away.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that introduction. So I think I noticed that there's some overlap with the sessions today. So my guess is that we're probably going to get some people streaming in after the session that's currently happening concurrent with this ends at 3:30. So the way I've kind of structured stuff is that I'm just going to give some more kind of front load my presentation with some backstory and some context. And then if people jump in at 3:30, we'll hopefully be getting into the meat of the discussion at that point. So like most TLDC presentations, conversations, this is mostly informal. I don't have any slides, but I do want to talk to you guys today about just like that wonderful introduction mentioned, just adapting to the change that we see in the world and applying the meta skill that I think is the ultimate meta skill. That's going to be my thesis argument, I guess, for this discussion is learning. Learning is the meta skill. So I want to kick things off with just a story. I think it's a real relatable story. Back when I was in high school, this would have been in the mid to late 90s, where I was a sophomore, junior around that time, where the question of what do I want to be when I grow up really started to come to the forefront and was something that needed to be really important. I needed to figure that out, decide my final years of high school, what classes I was going to take, and what college I was going to go to, and then ultimately the career I wanted to be. And, you know, that's a daunting prospect for any young adult to try and figure out what they want to do for the next few years of their life that will ultimately dictate potentially their entire life. But I remember just being really daunted by the haunting thought of, you know, what if I make a decision and I go through this 5, 6, maybe more years journey to get a college degree, and I come out the other side and there's no jobs available, or the thing I majored in is completely irrelevant now, things like that. So I was really concerned about that. And maybe if I wasn't such a moody, brooding teenager and would have actually sat down with an adult like my parents or a teacher, counselor, whoever, and they would have advised me that, you know what, that would be a big setback, but it also wouldn't be the end of the world, because if there's one constant in life, it's that there is change. Change is inevitable, and change happens. So I think at the same time, though, the one thing that no one really could have told me, I don't think I was surrounded by anyone, and I don't think really much of anyone in the world really understood just how much over the next few decades the world would really change. And that rate of accelerated change would just continue to be faster and faster, and that people would be out there intentionally trying to disrupt things and change things even more. And now we're at a situation where things happen so quickly and change on such a regular basis that we can barely keep things straight, not to mention when things like a global pandemic and economic downturn as a result get thrown into the mix. So in hindsight, I think what I was really suffering from was a fixed mindset versus the opposite, which would be a growth mindset. So back then, I really had a fixed mindset in thinking that the world wouldn't change or would be constant enough that I could find one thing, make one decision early on in my life, and then that I could stick with that and stick with that track. And then if the world happened to change, it would be kind of detrimental and it would really cause a lot of havoc. But the opposite of that thinking is a growth mindset, where we come to terms with the fact that change is inevitable and we expect change, and it doesn't derail us as much because we're ready for it, even though ultimately we can't predict what it is. And we understand that we need to plan, but no matter how much planning we have, things are going to inevitably change in some way anyway, and we're more prepared for it. And if you've been following me on TLDC, in 2020, I actually gave a 4-part job seeker series, and the first one of those was titled something like moving on after being let go, because I was actually let go from a job that I was only in for 5 months because of the economic impacts of COVID-19. And ironically, the thing I was laid off on a Wednesday, and the thing I was working on Monday was actually researching and writing content for a curriculum. And that particular portion of what I was working on was on a fix and a growth mindset. So I was reflecting on that and thinking how far I had come over the years to have more of a growth mindset, but also realizing there are some areas where I still have a fixed mindset. So maybe that prepared me a little bit more for a few days later when I was laid off. But anyway, along with that, it really goes, there's this huge, I'm a big picture kind of guy. And if you look at the big picture of what's happened over the course of my life in this transition from the 20th century to the 21st century, which I'm in my early 40s, so I'm pretty much on the halfway mark. Half my old life has been in the 20th century, and now half is in the 21st. You look at that, we're in this weird in-between phase where some people have called it like the third industrial revolution. So there was the first industrial revolution where, people are learning to manufacture things and move at a quick pace, and factories are happening. And that's probably the worst summary of the industrial revolution ever. But then we move kind of post-World War II slowly into the computer age that I was kind of born into and was in school, my early school years for. I remember in kindergarten, they wheeled in an Apple II computer. We were like the first kids to get them. And then while I was in high school, the internet came out. While I was in college, social media, actually there was like no real social media was out when I was in college, like all that stuff and cell phones and all that. So now we're in the information digital age. There's different terms for it. And like we've been talking about, the change of acceleration, or the change that things are happening, the acceleration of change is just, it's really hard to keep up with. And so we just have to have like a completely different way of coping with all these changes and this new world that we're in. And unfortunately, schools have historically not been able to keep up with that. Schools have historically, in the later half of the 20th century and even into today, are struggling to prepare students for today and tomorrow. And they're unfortunately still stuck in kind of some old traditional ways where they're preparing students for the past, where for hundreds of years it was kind of acceptable to have people go through school so they could the schools kind of churn out people that were, had traits like being obedient and conformance and could take direction well, because then they would go off and work in factories or office settings or go into the military, and then they would make for a nice little, they were prepared for those roles at that point. The problem now is the 21st century means we need to shift and adapt and do all these different things, and it's hard to prepare for that. And especially if you're in one fixed mindset saying, well, this is the way things are, this is the way I do things. So it's really, it's a challenge that schools are facing. And how do you instill that? How do you instill entrepreneurship in a child and all these other challenges that schools face? So that's kind of a weird ranting primer for my talk today. Since I'm a little early on my timing where I wanted to be at this point, I'll drop another story in there, which is I'm an e-learning developer, or at least that's where I started my career in 2007. And I had a background in web design. Well, first off, I should say, my fear that I had originally about, well, what if I go to college and then I graduate and then there's no jobs? That actually happened to me because I went into school in 2000 for web design and multimedia. And when I came out, it was a 2-year program. So I came out in 2002. And of course, the dot-com crash had happened, 9/11 had happened, and all the jobs that were, there was basically no jobs available. The places that were hiring had closed up shop in the majority of cases, and the few that are left weren't hiring. So it was a real hard time to come out and graduate. And it took me kind of a long time to get my footing and come back to relevant work, which started in 2007. And I was using, as an e-learning developer, I was using tools that you might be familiar with or you might not be. I was developing courses in Lectora and enhancing those with a lot of interactivity, mainly using Adobe Flash, which as of the beginning of this year is no longer a thing. But I recognized, okay, well, I recognize this fact that the world changes, that in order for me to advance and grow my career, I need to change along with it. And I've been using, Flash had a scripting language associated with it, a coding language. It was called ActionScript. And there were a couple iterations of it that were very similar to JavaScript. So it was very easy for people like me that had a web design background and a little bit of web development to come in and pick it up and then be able to add things into, to make things interactive, because the syntax was very similar to JavaScript. So learning a little bit of additional commands and things allowed me to do some stuff. But then for whatever reason, they released ActionScript 3, which they reworked from the ground up to be really more of a programming language, more like Java, which ironically has nothing to do with JavaScript, which is a whole nother can of worms. But I just decided, okay, if by all indications, we're talking like late 2000s, so 2009, early 2010, it looked like if I'm going to continue to use this tool, Flash, I needed to learn this ActionScript 3. So I really buckled down. I started getting books and studying as much as I could and getting my mind around this concept known as object-oriented programming, which is just a programming concept that you needed to know and to be able to apply and use ActionScript 3. And I was finally getting the hang of it. I was writing essentially, I don't want to say frameworks or libraries, that's kind of an overstating what it was, but I was creating these external ActionScript objects to do things that you would see in e-learning, like drag and drop interactions and different question types that you might see and things like that. So I could create those kind of interactivities in Flash, and I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time I went to do them. So I'm like really getting into this and I'm applying it to my work. And then I think it was like April 2010, Steve Jobs releases this press release letter thing that says the Adobe Flash will never be on iOS devices. So the iPhone and iPad, which either had just been announced or it was about to be. So that was like the first nail in the coffin of Adobe Flash. And immediately I'm like, and everyone knew it like right away. It's like, oh, great. What does this mean? Flash is never going to be on mobile devices. Shortly after that, Google had dropped support for Flash on their Android devices. And it was just clear that Flash was now relegated to the PC and its days were kind of numbered. So it seemed like I bet on the wrong horse, that I had spent all this time and energy learning this tool, or I should say this skill that wasn't going to really help me in the end. And that's true. But at the same time, I learned a lot of transferable skills like object-oriented programming, like I mentioned. And along the way, I learned how to write better code that didn't make programmer cringe, or at least not as cringe as much as maybe my code looked like before I tried to learn ActionScript 3. And yeah, so you think about those skills that I learned, those skills that I just mentioned are more broad. They can be applied not just to something very specific. So the nature of skills is just like I mentioned. So you have some that are very narrow and very specific and have very limited application, and some that are more broad that could be applied to other things. You can do it here, you can apply it there. And then there are some skills that are so broad and so encompassing that they encompass other skills within them. And that's what we refer to as meta skills. And of course, as the title of this presentation suggests, I would argue that learning is the ultimate meta skill because it allows us to gain all the other skills. It's like the one ring of skills for a Lord of the Rings reference. The one skill to rule them all is learning. And I don't think that's really anything. I don't think that's too groundbreaking of a statement to throw out there for learning and development professionals. But it's my hope today that the stuff that the way I want to frame things will help people think outside of the box to help them in their own careers, or possibly help the audiences that we serve as learning and development professionals, that we could help them apply their own skills, their own meta skills. So I talked about skills, the differences between kind of narrow and broad, and one definition I found that I liked for meta skills is that they are higher order skills that allow other skills to be used and developed. So let's give some examples of what I'm talking about to really make this concrete. So a surgeon needs to perform put a stent in someone's heart, a very specific form of surgery, a very specific surgery procedure, whatever would be the proper term. That's a very narrow skill, a very specific skill. It's also very important. So narrow skills, it doesn't mean they're not important by any means. Narrow skills can be vitally important, like in this case. A more broader skill that the surgeon might have is being able to use a scalpel, or he will have. If he's a surgeon, he will know how to use a scalpel. That's a broad skill that he can apply to different forms of surgery. And then his meta skill is surgery itself. He can apply that, all the knowledge that he knows about and a surgery and all the skills that go into it. Everything from using a scalpel to scrubbing in properly beforehand to everything he does as a surgeon. Excuse me. That's a form of meta skill. Another example, let's take it from reverse. So I have been a homeowner for many years, and as a result, out of necessity, I am very handy. I did not used to be handy by any means. I could barely drive a nail, but over the years, out of necessity, being faced with the reality of, okay, I either try to fix this myself or I pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have someone else come in and do it. I have taught myself many things. I used to draw the line at electrical and plumbing, but I've even crossed that line several times at this point. So being handy in that case would be my meta skill. Now I recently, and actually I'm halfway through it, I'm doing a project in my basement / crawl space where I'm re-insulating between the floor joists because it's cold all over the US right now, and I just want to get it done, decrease my heating bills, but also I can see where the cold air is coming in because it's been so cold out there lately. That specific thing of insulating floor joists, and because I'm using foam insulation boards, I'm measuring and cutting. That would be the broad skill of that. I'm measuring and cutting, and that's something I can apply to other things for my meta skill of being handy, because I can measure and cut other things like wood. I have a garden, so I can measure and cut lumber to form a raised garden bed or any other thing I'm doing. Measuring, cutting would be a nice broad skill. Being handy is a meta skill because there's lots of little skills under that allow me to keep my house in shape. So those are two examples. So now I'm going to ask for some audience participation and ask you guys, based on that, what do you think are some examples of meta skills related to a career in learning and development? And while you're thinking about that and hopefully typing in the chat, I want to talk about some characteristics of meta skills. We talked about that they generally have broad application and that they tend to encompass, well, by definition, they encompass other skills within them. Meta skills also have the benefit of being beneficial during your entire career or a big stretch of your career. They could even be lifelong benefits, have lifelong benefits. And MetaSkills also tend to be tool agnostic and job agnostic. These are things that you can pick up and apply from one tool to another, like one piece of software to another, or one job to another. So if you can think of any of those, type them in the chat. I have a big list here, and I have them in buckets that we can go through. Janet says curiosity and research, definitely. And it seems like from my thinking through this, the more meta you go, the closer you, not only do you tend to go more soft skill, but you also tend to reach this point where it's like, okay, is this a skill at this point, or is this a personality trait? And I guess that could start a debate. Like, is curiosity a skill, or is it a trait? I definitely would argue that you can enhance your curiosity. Like, it's maybe not something that can be learned, but it can be something that's enhanced. Another one would be empathy, which I think along similar lines. I think if you don't have empathy, you're kind of a psychopath. But you can learn and be intentional about trying to be more empathetic and more understanding of people's situations. Critical thinking, that's another one for sure. So these are skills that, yeah, definitely critical thinking. So the buckets that I have listed here, first off, and again, the question was, what are some examples, meta skills related to a career and learning development? The first bucket I have is professionalism, which you could say is a meta skill in and of itself. And then under that are other meta skills. Teamwork is a big one. Working well with others. Definitely a meta skill that you can apply to any job, any team setting that you're in, and more broadly in life too, communication, being able to effectively communicate your thoughts and ideas, definitely a skill that you need to have in your career. And a big part of that is listening, active listening, problem solving, being able to figure out what the problem is, being able to diagnose the problem is the first step of that. And then being able to come up with some possible solutions and solving that problem. Huge skill to have as a professional. Self-awareness. Yep, that is one. It's actually one I have listed as one of the buckets that contain other meta skills in them. So, and then there's some, cross relationships between a lot of these, because I have leadership as another bucket, and many of these could fall into leadership. But under self-awareness, I have emotional intelligence as a meta skill, having self-confidence, resilience. So if you're just joining us, we talked in the beginning about being able to adapt to change, and that the fact that in the 21st century, we have seen a tremendous amount of change that we couldn't have predicted, or it was very difficult to predict even in the late 20th century. And that how one of the biggest life skills essentially to work and survive in the 21st century is having adaptability and the resilience, the ability to just kind of recognize with a growth mindset that change is going to occur, and that just kind of roll with the punches, so to speak. Yeah, growth mindset, there you go. Innovation, yeah, being innovative, that's definitely one I didn't have on my list. Yeah, if you can be innovative, goes a little bit with creativity. The two kind of go hand in hand. Definitely a skill that you can apply and has many benefits. Yep. Let's see. Another one, a big one, would be interviewing. And really this goes for almost any field, because everyone has to know, if we want a job, we have to be able to land that job. And to be able to do that, we need to interview at least to a good enough degree to get the job. So interviewing is definitely a meta skill that I would encourage people to have. And then, of course, as again, the title of this session suggests, learning would be the ultimate meta skill, because without learning, we cannot have any of these other skills. We have to be able to learn how to do all of these things. And along with that, as we know as learning and development professionals, if we're intentional about it, we can then also learn to learn and be intentional with our learning and be more effective in our learning. And we can help others and coach others to do the same. Storytelling, an excellent one. Yep. Definitely a meta skill. Okay, so what do we think about, Q asks the question, what daily tasks I might think about can I focus on that would strengthen my learning skills at my job? That's a great question. Does anyone have any answers for him? Because that's kind of in line with what I was about to ask. So the question is, what daily tasks I might not think about? What daily tasks I might not think about can I focus on that would strengthen my learning skills at my job? What do you guys think? Daily tasks that he may not think about them, but they end up doing so. Okay. Christian says writing a to-do list and task management. Yeah, that would. So a daily task. Okay. Sorry, it's hard to present and think at the same time, so I'm having to problems processing your question, but I think people in the chat understand, and the answers that are coming in are writing a to-do list or task management, reflection journaling, asking, yeah, it's a difficult question for sure. Kathy says, look for free opportunities like this one to attend. Yep, make time to listen to a podcast. Yep, for sure. Yeah, learning and growing in our career. There's lots of avenues to do it. Obviously, huge plug for TLDC. I've been plugged in on and off for 3 or 4 years now, or something like that. My engagement is totally correlates to wherever I'm at, what current job I have, and how much of my time it takes up. But when I do have some time, I like to be plugged into the TLDC community and all the awesome things it offers. So if you guys aren't members, I'll just give a plug unprompted. I'm not paid to say it or anything. I strongly encourage people to become members if they're not, because this is a great community. Get plugged into the Slack channel that we have. There's events like this. There's it's like at least once a week there's a stream, and there's all these member showcases, so you get to learn about the other folks that are in the community. And yeah, it's just been a great resource, places to bounce ideas off people, maybe even job opportunities at times. It's just a great place. So big shout out to TLDC. And I think, when we're thinking about as L&D professionals, obviously this can help us in our own careers, but then there's the possibility that we can turn this around and help our learning audiences with this as well. I think, at least I'll speak for myself, so much of my career was focused on helping people with very narrow, specific skills, like creating a software training video, like just a quick demo of how to do something in a piece of software. That's very narrow, very focused. I'm not arguing that it wasn't important, but it's very narrow. And I think looking back on it, if we could have instead used that effort to teach people how to go out and fish, there's that phrase, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime. So in that situation, if we taught people how to go out and find answers to questions they have when they get stuck in the software versus creating videos to walk them through every little task, that might have been a more effective use in our time, and it's something that would translate over into other software as well. So I think in our roles, in many cases, it might depend on what we do and where we work at, what our organization is like. I think we do have a lot of opportunities to help people have more meta skills and be able to apply them in other areas. And I think we get more of a bang for our buck. Again, not to say that those narrow specific skills aren't something we need to do on many occasions, but yeah, and I think places where organizations do this really well tends to be around leadership development, because the organization recognizes, or maybe they've gone through some pain points where, because people tend to grow and advance in their careers and move up the corporate ladder, there's always these vacancies. And if you just put somebody in that spot that isn't prepared for it, they're often going to struggle, and they're going to make very predictable mistakes that first-time leaders and first-time managers make. So if we can prepare them for those roles and put them through some type of leadership curriculum where they'll be ready for it, and an organization can have what they tend to call a bench of people lined up. I don't know if it would necessarily be considered formal succession planning, but just they have their bench of people lined up, and they're like, okay, well, this guy's ready to go in a leadership position if one becomes available. And you can always, every leader can benefit from trying to be more of an effective leader. So those curriculums help existing leaders as well. So that's one area where I think generally all organizations tend to be pretty good at deploying MetaSkill transfer. Coming up with a lot of terms today. And then again, so I'm an accidental instructional designer. I don't have a formal background in this, and I was a little afraid about this. Q is asking, am I talking about Peter Principle? I don't know. Maybe all of this is some established thing, and they teach a whole semester on it in college if you were to take a formal ID class. I'm just kind of throwing some ideas out there, and I was hoping that I was kind of my unique perspective of being an accidental designer would kind of help people look at things from a different light. So maybe it is all Peter Principle. I'm not familiar with it. Just catching up with the chat. So after I gave a good plug for TLDC, we had some comments come in. Cindy says, sharing your work, what you are working on, absolutely. And Kristen says, the best part is that even if the stream itself isn't a topic you need help with, the people in the chat and on Slack are there for you. Yep, that's a going back to the TLDC Slack, great community to get plugged in with, great group, and a place to bounce ideas off people and all that good stuff. So yeah. When I started off developing content, I was consuming a lot of information to turn it into scripts and storyboards. It took me a while to realize that that's a skill to develop too. Yep, absolutely. Definitely an instructional design, a skill under the meta skill of instructional design is being able to, while you're developing content, is to take in all that information. I like to say we become mini subject matter experts ourselves when we take a project on as IDs, and then we have to boil that down to the essentials, and put that into scripts and storyboards and all that kind of stuff to ultimately develop a learning solution. And I think there's an art and a science to that boiling it down to the essential information, getting that right, but also convincing the stakeholders and SMEs involved that we can cut all this other stuff that isn't as essential as the other things, or we can put them as additional resources for people. We don't need to have them. We don't need to weigh all the information equally. We need to put these more important things at the forefront. That's definitely some skills to learn as an instructional designer for sure. Oh, okay. Peter Principle is a Michael Scott. It's an Office reference. See, I didn't get into that show well enough. That's my fault there. So in other words, it's promoting for the sake of promoting, even though they were successful in their previous position, not in a manager one. Yeah. So welcome, Cindy. Welcome to TLDC. Yeah, definitely get plugged into the chat. And yeah, we will see you there. Kristen says that also brings up a skill of learning out loud. That's right. I just gave a presentation on that. Keeping track of what you experience when you learn the material so you can better empathize with the next learners. Yeah. And, a thought that just made me think of is often in learning and development, at least from what I've experienced, I don't want to speak for others, but I've noticed that we have a tendency to not necessarily there's so many weird phrases for it. I think eat your own dog food is one, where we don't necessarily walk the talk. We say things and don't necessarily do them. As an e-learning developer, the one that I basically run into on a daily basis is, am I developing courses the way I would want to take an e-learning course? And if I'm asked to create a course in such a way that it contradicts with that, like with lockdown navigation, where I'm forced to look at the content and I have to complete the 5-minute video before I can advance. If I don't want to consume content like that, and the person who wants the course like that doesn't want to consume content like that, why do we think that the end learner would want to consume content like that? Why do we think there's a disconnect between what we're doing and the way we like things and the way learners would like things? And can we be more conscious of that and meet people where they're at in their day-to-day and give them a better user experience? Those are the kinds of things that I think of a lot. But more broadly, Kristen's comment made me think, by trying to pick up these meta skills for ourselves and apply them to our own careers, we're better equipped then to turn around and try and convince others to do it themselves. If we're more intentional with our own learning, then we'll be more successful in trying to coach and convince others to be more intentional with their learning. All right. So I'm almost coming up on time. I want to thank you guys for being so engaging in the chat, and I really hope you guys are enjoying Community Day. I have been being pulled several different ways. I've only been able to attend a couple sessions, so I'm sorry I didn't get to interact with and see a lot of the sessions that were going on and interact with the people here. But yeah, again, just one last plug for TLDC. I think this community is great. Excuse me. And again, if you're not a member, become a member now, because this is a great community. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Hey, thank you there, Joseph. Hey, I got a question for you while I still got you right here. You had mentioned before about you're an accidental instructional designer, like you didn't go into school for this or whatnot. What sort of experiences have you found just not feeling like you had been initially exposed to it, that you've been able to turn around and utilize in your daily work?
Can you say that again? I don't quite understand. Sorry.
Well, like here, I have a master's in instructional design. I've known this all my life, so I'm aware of a lot of these sort of principles that are kind of they're a part of our field and whatnot. And it sounds like from me, in your case, the job just ended up kind of choosing you, and it kind of put you into the field there. What are some of the things that you were kind of just taking on that were prior to that you were able to implement into your current position?
I see. Well, I should say that, although I am an accidental instructional designer, I did, once I knew that I wanted to kind of go that route, where I wanted to, at the very least, have more of a hybrid role where I'm part e-learning developer, part instructional designer, I did start to research some things and learn about lots of different stuff that one would if they went with a more formal education in instructional design. But what started it all off was I was a one-man show as far as graphic design and e-learning development went, in a very small team of 4 people. It was a manager, myself, and 2 instructional designers. And I was just curious because I thought if I can kind of learn what these instructional designers do, I will be able to create more effective e-learning development if I can kind of understand what their role is. It'll help me be a better e-learning developer. That's what started it all. And what was interesting is while I was going through that journey, I actually, on occasion, would come across things where I would kind of catch them doing, like, it would be like, I see this quiz question at the end, and I noticed we didn't have any content on that anywhere in the course, right? I was seeing things more from an instructional designer's mindset, whereas if I was just purely like, okay, I'm in this tool and I know how to use this tool and the slides look good and the question scores correctly and I'm done. I was thinking more as an instructional designer. And then that slowly got me to the point where I was being recognized, I guess, for those skills, and I was put in more situations to have more instructional designer responsibilities. So actually going out and meeting with subject matter experts and making sure that we were getting the right content in the course, really basic stuff as far as instructional design is concerned. And those skills then allowed me to interview well for the job that I switched over to when I went to a healthcare company that I was at for 7 years. And when I interviewed, I said I was an aspiring instructional designer. And they took me up on that, and really they threw me into the fire. And that's where I really got my feet wet and got my instructional design chops, because it wasn't that long after getting that job where I was taking instructional design projects almost from start to finish. I wasn't really in the intake process for training requests, but after those were approved, there might have been a little bit of analysis done by my manager, but then after that, he was handing things to me to really finish the analysis, do the design, do the development, make sure it works in the LMS, all that stuff.
Okay, so you understood, like, once you were in the field, the things that were necessary for an instructional designer to perform a task or to create a learning event and so forth, but you're bringing some of the things that you had prior to that, like empathy skills that you had prior to that, and applying them directly into your work. Like you had mentioned before about not wanting a course to play a particular way because you wouldn't even want to have that sort of experience. So you try to incorporate that as you're building yourself. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, that's true. And I think maybe coming from the opposite end of where many people come when they approach instructional design, a lot of people come with maybe an education background or the formal ID background, where I'm coming from web design background. So I was always approaching it, looking at the typical e-learning course and saying, why does it look like that? Like, why are we designing things like this? Why do these courses always look like they're 10 years older than they need to be, right? And I was always had that eye for the user experience, and then eventually found the discipline of user experience and got into that, and then really started to want to advocate for better courses. So that's where that mindset came from, and having more of that empathy.
Okay. Yeah, I love Conrad Gottfriedson. I took a class with him years ago, but he had this thing about 2 clicks in 10 seconds. Like, no matter what is going to be delivered to the learner, like, it needs to be there within 2 clicks or 10 seconds, or you're kind of wasting their time. So even though you're providing them all this training or whatnot, it's not going to matter until it hits that moment of need. So having that sort of mindset going forward probably makes a difference between how you deliver a particular piece of content or a learning event or even a particular program.
Definitely. And I like to, I could easily say, okay, my responsibility for everything starts when the course launches, if I'm developing an e-learning course, or the video launches in the LMS. But a true user experience starts, you consider the entire day of the employee or whoever the learner, what their role is. So it doesn't start when the course or the video launches. It starts when they it goes farther back, like when they open up log into the LMS. It goes when they open their computer. It goes to whatever their workday is like. Where are they at? Are they in a warehouse? Are they just sitting at a desk in front of a computer where they have a minute, or they have the time to at least have the course up all the time? Or are they working some type of job where they're going to be constantly interrupted? If we're not thinking about those things and we release a 40-minute course to people that are in a role where they're constantly interrupted, there's a huge disconnect there that I think we're totally failing our learners if we're doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, some of the things I feel like are kind of out of my control, where I'm just kind of used to it, where it's just, that's the way that it's always done. And, it's taking that step back and kind of looking at those sorts of things. Like, really, do you think you need to do that? I know we're a little minute or so past our time right here. I really want to thank Joseph Suarez for providing us with this wonderful talk on the ultimate MetaSkill. Let's give him a nice round of applause, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for being engaging in the chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Please be sure to stop by the tables in the lounge to network, try that speed networking, and go to the arena and explore some of the exhibitors that are participating in this event. So look forward to seeing everyone in the next session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you.